Okay, so we are in the latter part of Matthew 23. Last week we started this chapter, and Jesus has been talking to the scribes and the Pharisees. He's actually talking to the people, but he's talking about the scribes and the Pharisees. And he pointed out a lot of things that they did for show. They really did things for show. They made their little wooden black boxes bigger and their tassels longer, and he's calling them out on it, saying that this didn't make you any more righteous than anybody else. And they tried to bring more of the focus to themselves. Okay, so verse 5 really summed up what Jesus was trying to say in this whole first part. Everything they do is done for men to see. So that brings us to the next part of the chapter. My nose is giving me problems this morning. And we start the woes, and we're going to start them in verse 13. And I'm going to take these one at a time. There's going to be 7 of these, 7 woes. And what the word woe means, Mary, what word did you tell me the other day? Sorrow. Sorrow. Great sorrow. There's a Greek term called ooh-I. That's what it is, and that's where that term woe comes from. But it's an expression of grief, and a good English word that we might use besides sorrowful is alas. Alas. It's an expression of horror, sorrow, dread, and in our own words, it would be like Jesus saying, how sad and how dreadful is your condition. That's what he's going to say. Again, he's talking to the scribes and the Pharisees, and this is going to be strong language for them about their character and their behavior. So let's look at verse 13 and let's read it. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the kingdom of heaven in men's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. So he paints this vivid picture of the church when he says the kingdom of the heaven, of a church, like a building or a house where people are inside pressed up with their faces to the door. Let me out, let me enter, let me out, let me out. The people want to enter. Okay, I guess they're outside wanting to enter. The people want to enter, but because of the oral traditions and the hypocritical lifestyle of a Pharisee, the doors have been closed and locked. Okay? The rules and regulations of these religious leaders made it impossible to enter the kingdom of heaven. That's how Jesus described it. The leaders even refused to believe it, but now they're preventing others from obeying too. And you think about it, that's so true. They didn't believe in Jesus or what he came for, but now they're persuading other people that same way. And so Jesus uses that description of somebody trying to get inside of a house or a building. I went in, and they have locked the doors on them. So if you notice, verse 14 is missing. Mine jumps from 13 to 15. Does anybody's have it?
In a footnote.
Okay, it's in the footnote. So I want to read what it says. It says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You devour widows' houses, and for a show make lengthy prayers. Therefore, you will be punished more severely. He specifically calls out the fact that they have swindled widows. I don't know if this is out of their inheritance or their properties. Mine says widows' houses. So out of whatever they had left, they take it. And God does not look kindly on people who mistreat widows. And I want to look at Exodus 22. We may be back and forth for a while because I want you to know that all these things were in the law. These people should have known these things. If you look at Exodus 22, I'm going to read what their law said about taking care of widows. So Exodus 22, verse 22, it says, do not take advantage of a widow or an orphan. And that sounds pretty plain to me, doesn't it? If you do, and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry. my anger will be aroused, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will become widows, and your children fatherless. That is in the law that they should have known. So, whenever Jesus points out, you've been taking advantage of these widows, it was ooh. You should know better than that. You got something to say, Mary?
Well, yes, because widows, unless you had children or sons, you were left with nothing.
You were left with nothing. That's exactly. You might have. I even understood that the property. Maybe they got to keep the. Yeah, it went to the son's name. But the property wasn't yours either. I guess the house that you lived in might be the house you could still live in, but I don't know how you would provide for yourself unless you found yourself another.
That's why he said, respect your parents, honor your parents.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, I thought it was. I don't know why 14 is not where it should be and why it's down here in a footnote, but I thought it was important to put it in there. So now let's look at 15. Here we go. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. He says the same thing over and over again. You travel over land and sea to win a single convert. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. Does anybody have a different version than that?
No,
that's the NIV that I'm reading from. You make it twice as much.
Yeah,
twofold a son of hell as you are. So anyway.
Mine says child of hell in yourself.
Okay, child of hell. Okay. So this shows you the lengths that they would go to try to gain a convert. But Jesus said that all your hard work at converting others was misspent because the finished result was that you hadn't gained the right kind of convert. If you got one, it was not the right kind, but rather others that were even more strict with the traditions that were already in place. These new converts held even more closely to the traditions set in place by their predecessors. The Pharisees made their spiritual condition even worse, not better, by their evangelism efforts. So I found that was interesting that he talks about that. Mary gave me this on Sunday, and it says the essential question, what is right and what is wrong, okay? And so these are things that they had wrong, saying one thing but doing the opposite, burdening others with unreasonable expectations, doing good things only to be noticed by others, seeking and even fighting for honors, thinking that greatness is defined by position and authority instead of humble service, using religiosity as a cover for victimizing the poor and the needy. All of these were so true of them. And here is one where he even talks about how they converted people and what they did to convert people. Verse 16. I'm going to read this whole little section as one. I think it goes through verse 22. So I'm going to start at 16 and read through 22. Woe to you, blind guides! You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by that oath. You blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You also say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift on it, he is bound by that oath. You blind men, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, he who swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And he who swears by the temple swears by it and by the one who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it. Okay, so first of all, I love the fact that he calls him a blind guide, because is that not a contradiction in terms? How could anybody who's blind guide anybody else? And so he calls them that. Sometimes I think, when I really think about that, I think, did they all chuckle? Did anybody in the audience find that kind of funny that Jesus called them that, Or was it just total silence when he said something like that? The Pharisees had decided that there were certain oaths that were binding and others that were not. So, an oath. Another name for an oath is a promise, or something you have promised by God to do or promised to somebody else that you would do. You have made an oath. And many times, to make it even more firm, to say, I'm going to do this, they would swear by something really important to them. And so therefore they started off by the temple. And what's even greater than the temple but the gold in the temple? You know, we're going to try to make this, I'm going to do this. And so they were swearing by these things. But it's interesting that the things that they said they could get out of. If you swore it by the temple, it was not a binding oath. But if you swore it by the gold in the temple, then yeah, you better keep that one. That one's more important, you know. And then to make it even worse, they added the altar in there, you know. Without a doubt, did you know in the scripture it says that the altar was more sacred than the gift offered on it? That is in Exodus 29 verse 37. You don't have to turn there. I'm going to read it to you. I have them all marked today. That's what all these little things are marked. But in Exodus 29 verse 37, if they knew their law, they would know this. For 7 days make atonement for the altar and consecrate it. Then the altar will be most holy, and whatever touches it will be holy. Oh, but they had made a distinction. They had made a distinction between that. Jesus explained if you swear by the altar, it was impossible not to swear by the sacrifice that was on it. The same was true of the temple. If you swore an oath to the temple, then you swore an oath to God who dwells in the temple. The sacrifice became one with the altar when the sacrifice was made. To try and make a distinction between the altar and the sacrifice, the temple and God, was totally impossible, even silly. Okay? They had it all wrong. They were trying to say that this oath was binding and this oath wasn't. You're going to say probably what I'm going to say next, but go ahead.
Well, when God made the laws and all the rules in Leviticus, they're very simple.
Yes.
Well, they were very simple, but they were very direct. And they told you how you had to do that.
Yeah.
And they gave you 10 different things that you had to do to keep that, which were, you know, what they thought and not what God thought.
Right. Very good. So the last thing that Jesus brings up is the fact that swearing by heaven was not binding, but swearing by the throne of God was. You know, what is this really about, this whole section? What you have to think. You can't swear by this, but you can't swear by this. What it really was about is, to sum up the whole section, is that the whole idea of treating oaths in this way was just a technique in evasion. It was. A truly religious man would never make a promise with the deliberate intention of not keeping it. But they had put loopholes in all of their promises. They had. A religious person would not make a promise while providing himself with numerous escape routes, which he may use if he finds it too hard to keep. And that is what they had done. To Jesus, God hears every word we speak. God sees every intention of our hearts. The Jewish leaders were masters of evasion. And that is what all this was about. You know, well, if you swore by that, well, you've got to keep it, telling the people. But if we just swear by the temple, so you don't have to keep that one. They had decided all of these things. I was running this through with my sister today.
Well, the Mishnah, it's about this thick. My son has a copy of it, and it is about that thick. You know, of how you're supposed to do it.
Yeah. She brought up the fact that, and I've said this before, that Jesus had said his yoke was easy and his burden was light, and theirs wasn't. They had made it so difficult. For example, here's what she used. She said dancing. You weren't supposed to dance. No dancing. So if you were going to fall down, you better just fall flat on your face, because if you flail your arms around, that might be considered dancing. I mean, this is how silly it was. You know, they were like, really? Yeah, and so
they wanted you to be in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems that way, doesn't it? It seems like they wanted you to be in trouble. Okay, so let's move on to the fourth woe statement in verse 23. Verse 23. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. That's another funny about Jesus. So, according to Jewish law, the people were to tithe from what they produced, whether it was a crop or an animal. It was to help support the Levitical priesthood and the material work of the temple. Leviticus 27:30. That's where that comes from. Leviticus 27:30 says, a tithe of everything from the land, whether grain from the soil or fruit from the trees. It belongs to the Lord. It is holy to the Lord. If a man redeems any of his tithe, he must add a fifth of the value to it. The entire tithe of the herd and the flock, every 10th animal that passes under the shepherd's rod, will be holy to the Lord. So that's where they get that. Tithe means tenth. It means a tenth. So it was universally accepted that you tithe your main crops, your animals, everything that belonged to you, your source of income, because that's what that was, your source of income. You tithe to the Lord. But Jesus brings up mint, dill, and cumin. Now, there were not humongous fields of mint growing in Bible times. This is what each individual person might have in their herb garden. I might have a little patch of mint and a little patch of cumin, a little patch of that. That's what the Pharisees decided to tithe. They went to their little herb garden, things that they use for cooking, and they got it, and they tithed the smallest amount of each plant. Okay? They would tithe a cup of mint, but they were guilty of injustice. Many kept the tiniest detail of the law and forgot about the things that really mattered the most.
Yeah.
But Jesus reversed it. He put the greater importance on justice, mercy, and faith, which they were very they were very low on mercy and things like that.
They had forgotten what Micah said in Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to show mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Yes.
They forgot all about that.
So they are more important because they have to deal with the relationship that one has with his fellow man and his God. Those things deal with relationships, you know, not tithing your mint and your dill and your cumin. It's so easy to observe all the outward actions of religion and be completely irreligious, you know. Jesus ends the section with the funny. He says that they carefully strain out the smallest of creature, which is the gnat, from their wine, but they gulp down the camel. Both animals were considered unclean to the Jew, and Jesus showed how inconsistent they were. It is a picture of a man that has completely lost his sense of proportion. So anyway, I thought that was kind of funny. Okay, so that brings us to the fifth woe in verse 25. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the dish, and then the outside also will be clean. So Jesus is going to use a simile here. He paints a picture in our minds. And he says the Pharisees and the scribes are like a dish that's been so carefully washed and cleaned on the outside, even polished on the outside of it, but not so cleaned on the inside. I was thinking about that teapot that I just had. How much time I spent making the outside looks really nice, polish it up. I keep the dirt off of it at home. It sits out all the time. I keep the dirt off of it. But inside, it's got this thing where coffee has been brewed for a long, long time. And it's turned the color of coffee. Now, I can't get it out no matter how hard. And I do rinse it out and everything. But they were like that. Tarnished on the inside. Stained, totally stained, dirty even on the inside of their soul. And their outside was shined perfectly. And he uses that illustration for us. He says inside they're full of greed and self-indulgence. Your version may use the word extortion and excess. We all know what extortion means, you know. They robbed. And when combined with excess, it just showed that they had no restraint and no control. A cup or a dish cannot be full of greed or self-indulgence, but men can be. Jesus said by cleaning the inside of the cup or dish, then the likeliness of the outside would also be clean. In men, this is always true. If the inside of a man is pure, so the deeds will be also. So Jesus was challenging them to clean up their hearts, clean up the inside of them. Because in doing so, then their deeds and their motives would also be pure and holy. Go ahead, Mary.
You know, in Mark, I think does in Mark talk about, I don't remember now where it is. I thought it was in 14.
I may,
12, 14, Mark 7.
what is it?
He talks about that unclean. He goes into a little more detail.
In Mark?
Yeah,
Okay.
Mark. The Pharisees, all Jews do
It's-
not eat unless they give their hands the ceremony of washing, holding on to. When they come to the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash, and they observe many traditions, such as washing cups, pitchers, and kettles. Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with unclean hands?
Yeah.
That's when they were chastising Jesus.
They were talking about the ceremonial washings when they had taken, yes. They weren't washing before their meal or something like
Yeah.
that. So, yeah. Okay, so Jesus goes on to woe number 6, which is in verse 27. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Wow. He just keeps saying it over and over again. So what is a whitewashed tomb? Well, one of the commentators I read said, well, this was true across the board. Whenever the people were coming into town for the Passover, they traveled from everywhere, and there were a lot of people on the roads and everything. Back in, let me see if I can figure out what the scripture was. Oh, it's Numbers 19:16. Numbers 19:16 said that if you came in contact, especially if you were a priest, and you came in contact with something that was unclean, an unclean body or anything like that, then you were ceremonially unclean and you could not participate in the Passover or go into the temple or anything else. So there was this huge deal about being sure that the tombs were marked. Well, how do you mark a tomb? They literally, anywhere there was a little cave or a little crevice or the rocky areas throughout, there could be a body buried there. And sometimes I read it was undistinguishable exactly where these tombs were. They still are uncovering tombs today that they had lost. So what they had decided to do was they would take white lime and they would mark these areas where bodies were buried. And throughout the year, it would wash away. It'd been a whole year and the rain had washed it, the elements had washed it all away. And so they had to be found again and they had to be whitewashed again in preparation for all of these travelers coming into town. And they wanted to make it easily distinguishable so that you would not become unclean. So Jesus uses that term that everybody was familiar with and said, you know, these graves are full of rot and stench, but they look really nice on the outside because we've whitewashed all of them. He goes, and you're just like that. You're full of rot and stench. You're full of hypocrisy. It was a very vivid picture that he painted. But you look so good on the outside, kind of thing. They appeared righteous, but within them they were full of all kinds of spiritual corruption. So that brings us to number 7, and it is found in 29. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets, and you decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our forefathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up, then, the measure of the sin of your forefathers. Oh, boy. This is all building to this one. He says that they have taken and built monuments, even decorated the tombs of these notable prophets, that their forefathers had killed. Okay? They bragged that they were better men than their fathers. The truth was that in spite of their pretended holiness and respect for the prophets, Jesus knew their hearts. They would be men that are behind the death of Christ in less than a week now. Jesus challenged them when he said, fill up. He said, reveal yourselves and finish the work, because I know what you're going to do. Fill up. They will do it. They will persecute him, ultimately kill Jesus, and they will also kill others when the church begins. Paul, who is a Pharisee, Saul, who is a Pharisee, will stand at the foot of Stephen as he is stoned. Jesus tells them, that's what you're going to do. You think you're so better than your forefathers that killed the other prophets by decorating their graves. He says, I know what you're going to do. John the Baptist had called them a brood of vipers. Look at verse 33. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore I am sending you prophets and wise men and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. I tell you the truth, all this will come upon this generation. Nothing about the character of these men had changed. John the Baptist had called them a brood of vipers, and Jesus called them the same thing. Because you're the same people that he condemned, that he saw and condemned. And there's going to be no escape from them. What I like about this is he says, I'm going to keep sending you people. I'm going to send my men, my prophets, my teachers to you. He goes, and I know what you're going to do to them. It's almost like he's saying, Saul's going to stand at the feet of Stephen, pursuing them town to town. That's what Saul was doing.
And all of this comes true.
All of that's going to come true. Of course it is. You know, he's going to continue. He goes, and you're going to continue to mistreat them and kill them. When we studied the Kings a couple of years ago, we studied about a priest named Zechariah. I don't know if y'all remember. Joash was the baby when Athaliah, she was wicked, wicked, wicked. Athaliah killed all of her sons so that she could be queen. She's going to be queen, I think, for 6 or 7 years. But baby Joash was taken and hidden. They kept him hidden for 7 years, apparently. So it may have been about 7 years. He was kept by, what was her name? I'm going to look it up just real quick. I know sort of where. It's 2 Chronicles 24, because I just want to get the details right for you. 2 Chronicles 24. Yep, that's why I marked that. Yeah, Athaliah, that was her. 6 years she's going to rule the land. It was Jehoiada and Jehosheba. Jehosheba was the wife. She took baby Joash. Jehoiada was the priest, and they hid him in the temple the whole time Athaliah was queen, until he got old enough to be king. And at 7, the beginning of chapter 24, 7 years old, he becomes king of the land. They have another son. Jehosheba and Jehoiada have another son, Zechariah. Guess who's going to allow Zechariah to be killed? If you look down at verse 17 of chapter 24, the wickedness of Joash. He turns. Verse, let me see where it is that he turns and has him killed. Okay, yeah, look at verse 20. The Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, son of Jehoiada the priest. He stood before the people and he said, this is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper because you have forsaken the Lord and he has forsaken you. 21, but they plotted against him, and by order of the king, that would be King Joash, his almost like a brother to him, stoned him to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple. King Joash did not remember the kindness Zechariah's father Jehoiada had shown him but killed his own son, who said as he lay dying, "May the Lord see this and call you to account." I believe that is what Jesus is referring to. It summarizes the history of the Hebrew people, because he says, from Abel, righteous Abel, to the blood of Zechariah. He basically encompasses all of Hebrew history. Genesis, the first book of the Hebrew Bible, 2 Chronicles, the last book of the Hebrew Bible, and he chooses these men to put in it. The expression from Abel to Zechariah took in all the history pertaining to God's people. And Jesus basically says, "So upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on this earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. I tell you the truth, all of this will come upon this generation." So he's coming up for the big finale. You know, thinking, what is he going to say at the very end of this speech? All these 7 woes on these people. And it's really sad. It's really sad. I think Jesus is tender-hearted. He's a tender-hearted kind of guy. He's just, but he's tender-hearted. Look at verse 37. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets and stoned those sent to you. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" They had had every opportunity to turn, yet they abused the messengers that were sent by God. I think Jesus in his words is showing how he longed for his people to be saved. He wanted to protect them. He wanted to hide them under his wings, but they would not allow him. Baby chicks normally will scurry to their mother and run underneath her wings for safety. They run to her and get under there as quickly as they can. It's what he's always wanted, his children to flee to him for safety. It's a sad piece of scripture. But when he says that their house is left desolate, he is simply referring to the city of Jerusalem and the temple. It will be left desolate. It was no longer God's, but instead it now belonged to the Jewish nation. And the Romans will burn the city in 70 AD and destroy the temple, and it will become desolate, deserted, and destroyed. Any nation which rejects God is doomed to disaster. This disaster was a direct consequence of the Jewish nation rejecting Jesus. Jesus clearly withdraws from the Jews and their house and their city until that day when some will acknowledge him as the Blessed One and praise him. So he is just finished. I'm done. I'm done. If we start chapter 24, the very first verse says, Jesus left the temple and was walking away. That is the last time he leaves that temple. That's it. It's over. And he had just given us a glimpse as to what is coming in the future. And this next chapter is all about that. His disciples are going to be about, what are you talking about? Because he says, this temple is going down.
Because the 12 are just as much in a puzzle as the rest of the people.
They are. I'm going to finish reading the rest of this that Mary gave me about what they were doing wrong. They gave the appearance of generosity and kindness while simultaneously neglecting justice, mercy, and faith. They pointed out others' minor flaws while ignoring their own major flaws, paying inordinate attention to their outer beauty while neglecting their inner beauty, proclaiming your innocence in the face of your obvious guilt. And that's what they were, those are the things that Jesus knew that they were doing wrong, and he pointed it out in that chapter to them. And then he ended it by saying, I'm really sad because I would have liked for you to gather to me, but you're not going to do it, you know. So we're going to stop there. We'll start Matthew 24 next week. I'm close on time, so I'm going to stop right there.